So there's a lot of different ways to do multiplayer in Scratch. Now I haven't really used Scratch in quite a bit. I'm here on and off, so my scratching abilities have been a little bit dwindled. But I thought, well, I recently had someone asking me to help them on this like multiplayer like game thing, and the multiplayer wasn't working, like the joining wasn't working. So I wasn't really sure what was going on there, but I thought the best thing I could do is create my own little multiplayer script that can just kind of refresh my mind and maybe can substitute for their multiplayer system. So, and then I built it and it actually works really well. So I don't know how, there's probably a ton of other ways to do multiplayer stuff, but I thought this was good to demonstrate this version of it that I've built. On the screen right now, you can see this. I believe that'd be moving right now. This is a little window. This is not the same window. This is a second window, a second monitor window. So this is just test this like a player two, and I just have it down here because so we can see it on screen at the same time. Also, I am having to make the window a lot smaller to fit it. So for me, my monitor's like it's what is it, 2650 something by 1440. It's 1440p monitor, and then I have my browser at 1920 by 1080 right now, so it is a little bit smaller for me. So I don't know if the it's it's clear, like the words. It's clear for me, but I don't know how it's coming up on the video. Anyway, so that disclaimer out the way. I'm gonna run this system, and I'm just gonna run it first, and then you'll see what it is. So before I run it though, this variable right here, this little orange one, this is the player number. This is a 4-player multiplayer system, only 4 players max. So this is the player number you're going to get assigned if there's room for your connection. And then these 4 variables are just to visualize the connection status. I mean, they're used, like it's not like just to visualize it, but these 4 variables out of all of these variables are the best ones to show that it's working. So when I press this, right now it's checking over the next 3 seconds, and actually just finished right there. For 3 seconds, it's checking if any of the pings, any of the status of player 1, 2, 3, or 4 are being flipped on and off. And when they are flipped on and off, every time they're flipped, this goes up by 1. And so these all stayed at 0, which means that none of the players are connected. And it says, okay, well, if player 1's not connected, let me become player 1. If player 1's connected, then go to 2, and then so on, and see which one's available. And if none of them are available, then it will show a full screen. So I could actually well, I don't need to demonstrate that yet. I'll demonstrate the full screen, or this thing. Lobby is full. This comes up when the lobby is full, and it will stop the script. Okay, so now that I'm connected, though, I'm still connected. On this screen, now you can see my mouse over here. When I run this, now up here it's connecting, because this other screen over here is actually sending the connection back and forth, it's pinging. So after you connect to one of these players, you start pinging that little number. And then over here it said in those 3 seconds, it pinged 13 times. And I basically have it such that if it's greater than 0, then someone's connected to it. Now you could change that threshold. Maybe you want to make sure that maybe someone has a bad connection. So if it'll do it like 2 pings over those 3 seconds or 5 seconds, whatever. But that's too low for you. So you only want good connection. So maybe if it's at a low connection, it will override it, and then for the person who's at player 1, it will disconnect them and then reconnect this new player. But now we have a player 2 here. So player 1 and player 2 is connected. And then if we go to player 1 status on the cloud and player 2 status, you can see that these two are being flipped over back and forth. So these are the pings I was talking about. So that's it working. So now I want to talk about, so I could actually move this out the way. So the next thing I want to show is how it actually works. So let me actually connect or disconnect these two, press the stop sign for both of them. And let's see, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so I have more room here. Also, real quick, this setup, like the way this looks, the reason it's like these tabs are up here and this down here is because I'm using you can't see it, but I'm using the Scratch add-ons. If you go to Griff Patch's YouTube channel, he has probably a link somewhere. I think I got it from his channel, but you could just look up Scratch add-ons and then you'll probably find it. It's just a Chrome browser extension. Anyway, so there's that. So the way this works is, this is where everything begins, and it starts out. So everything about this, all the data for this project, because the way I make project is that I have it such that you can right-click, export, and then add this to your projects. I basically make everything inside one sprite because it's just useful. It feels like you're adding a plugin or something to your game. So the way I do that though is like everything about this, like, quote plugin has like a name for it. So 4PMP is for 4-player multiplayer. And so everything under 4PMP is about this. So that's how you can organize it. So when you go into variables and you're making new variables, at least all of the data here stays together. Okay. So the reset, if we go over here, this is the reset. All it does is puts the sprite at the center, and essentially all of this is just so that if you can't connect, then let's do something. If I press this, if I do, let me find this show, and then let me get to the costume, and if I do that, this pops up. So it's just to center this, because if this is like at some random number, it like pushes it over. So that's just for that. Oops. And then the two variables here are the player status ping duration and then the user number. So the player status ping duration, this is how many seconds it will check for when you're connecting. So 3 I think is pretty good. Maybe 5 is a little bit more safer, but if you do like 1 second, it might not be long enough to, you might go, a ping might happen, but it happened between or on the beginning and end of that second, like on the outside, so you never actually caught a ping. So for my sake, 3 is good, because as we saw before, if I pull this back over here, we got 13 pings in those 3 seconds. So if someone has a worse connection, it might be like 5 pings in those 3 seconds. So if you have 1 second duration, they might even miss a ping. So then the next variable is the user player number. So everything under user, I only have 1 variable under user, but everything under user is for you specifically. All the data that's for you when you're connecting. Whereas the player stuff is for like the actual players, like the data that's going to be put into the cloud players. So when you connect, it starts out, well, before you connect, it starts out as 0. And then, oh, sorry, I looked over, I thought I wasn't recording. So when you connect, it starts out as 0, and then if you didn't find any players, and then it's still 0, then down here, let's see. Right, so it runs, let me go back over here. It runs the try connection, and it waits for that to finish, and then it does the join or full. So if it's full, you'll see down here in the join or full, it says if the player number is 0 still, then technically I don't need this, I guess, but I go to 0, 0, I switch costume to lobby is full, and then I show the lobby is full, and then I just stop everything. And then boom, it's done. Now in this spot, you could change this. So you can say, well, if it is full, you might go to a single player game instead, or whatever your situation is. But for now, I just have it stopping right there. And so now we can look at this big block of code. So what this is doing, let me make that smaller again, is essentially it's starting, so there's a couple variables. Let me break down the variables first before actually. So the variables go for all the cloud variables. There's a player's one's data and player one status. We saw what the status does. The data is going to be where you just send like your location data, anything you want to send over this, it's going to go in here. And then you have to encrypt it because only numbers can be stored in here. So let's say you wanted to store a position in the game of the player, like the X and Y position. Well, you need to have a format for that. So you can't just set this to, the X position, because where do you put the Y position? So maybe you have it such that you store, 001. So whenever you see the numbers 001, that means this is for the X location, and then you put the actual position, X location, without the decimals, or maybe, there's a lot of ways to do it. There's encryption. Essentially, you need to fit all the data into one variable for the player. And then every other player will be able to look at this variable and see where you are, and then render you in the right spot relative to them and whatever. So that's how that works. And then what we have down here is player 1 last status. The last status is the last frame status. That's how I can tell if it flipped, if the status flipped, because it was a 0 before and now it's a 1, or it was a 1 before and now it's a 0. And the way I do that here is essentially I set the last status to the current status in the beginning, and then down here, so in here in the repeat until, I'll explain that in a second, but right here I say set last status to the status. It's the same thing up here, but I'm checking before I set it. I'm checking if they're not equal right here, this not equal thing. So before they're actually set to the same one, the frame before is still 1 frame off the status. So yeah, okay. Then the next variable is the status accumulator. We saw what that does. And then the ping start. So the reason I have a ping start here, this variable just starts the timer, or like it sets it to where the timer is currently. I do that because let's say you want to try to do the connection, like you want to try this connection again, but you've already been loaded the project. Like if I go and look at timer, we can see that timer is at 540 seconds. And so if I were to do 540 seconds minus like 0, because at the start of the game it would have been at 0, then clearly that's way bigger than the 3 seconds. So I do that such that whenever you start it, it will always be a 3-second distance. So you don't have to worry about that. Then it sets all the accumulators to 0, resets that, and then it resets the status. And then I explained this a bit. Maybe I can go in a little bit further though. So, or I'll do this again. Yeah. So the repeat until, it's basically saying, okay, what is the timer at currently, and what was it at the start? So most of the time when it starts, it'll be at 0. This variable would be at 0, or it would be technically. Let me actually show you. It'll be a little bit different. If I do ping start, you see when I started this project, it started it at instead of 0, it started at 0.033, because it took that many milliseconds to, or that many seconds because it's a decimal, but 33 milliseconds to actually start this variable, to actually set it to that variable. And then it says, okay, it's that greater than 3. And then eventually that will become greater than 3, and it will stop running this code. And then in the code it says if player status and last player status is not equal to each other, then up the count, the accumulator, flip it, or not flip it, but increase it by 1 for all 4 players. Then after that's done, it says if player status 1 accumulator equals 0, then it's actually free. Like no one was attached to that player, like there's no one connected. So it's free, so it sets the user to player 1, and it just stops the script there. And then if it wasn't true, then it goes to the player 2, player 3, player 4, and it'll run through that whole thing. And then if none of them were there, then user player number is still set to 0. And then it will finish this code and then go to join or full. And that's basically it. That's how the whole system works, and we saw it works pretty good. And yeah, there's not really much else besides, I guess, the next step if you imported this would be to actually create code such that I didn't explain this, so let me explain that in a sec. But the next step would be to create code such that you could actually put data in the player data variables. So let me stop this so that it's not blurry. Right, so in the join full, I ran through this already, but I'll do it again. This is setting the player. This is saying if the player is at 0, then show that the lobby is full, and then just stop. Now, if it's not a 0, if the player number is 1, so if player number is 1, then forever ping the player status, flip the player status. And the way I'm flipping it is essentially if you have 1 minus something, right? 1 minus 0 equals 1. Now, if you put that 1 into this spot, then 1 minus 1 is 0, and then you put that 0 in that spot, and then it just flips. So if you had 2, then this will flip back between 2 and 0. It would just flip whatever you have here. So that's how I have that there. And I do that for all of them. Now, an interesting note I want to point out is that technically you could also do it this way. You could flip this whole thing. Whoops. So you could have it doing this. Let me, well, okay, just pretend that what I'm doing right here, I'm copying these over 4. Let's say these were all the 4 players. They're all player 1, but let's say this is player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4. I could do it this way, but that means that every frame, it's checking to see if it's player 1, player 2, player 3, or player 4. Whereas this way, it only checks that first time and then forever it just runs code. So this is actually a more optimized way of doing it. It's very negligible, but if you had something running, if that check was incredibly expensive, then this is way better than doing it the other way. And yeah, and that's it. So hope this helps. Hope this is good. I'm going to share. I haven't even shared this yet, so might as well share it now. And I'll put my this YouTube video here in the instructions, or maybe down here or something. But yeah, I think that was it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy using this project if you do, or just learn something new. And yeah.